Hi, I'm Elle, and today I'm talking about decolonial shadow work. This is really a beginner's guide to the energy work around decolonization, and this video is specifically oriented towards white people or people with colonial ancestry. This video I'm making not as an expert or as a teacher, but just someone sharing my path along this journey as someone who's been very curious about this and in a practice and commitment to this work for a while now. I just recently finished a course with Doctora Rosales Rocio Metza, and this was such a huge shift for me in getting a lot of really useful information into application in my life about what it means to shift out of the programming of colonial energy that exists in all of us and into empowerment, belonging, and right relationship with all beings on earth. I think that this information is so rich and potent right now for people to be practicing in their daily lives as we look to fight the urgency and the crisis of where we are in the world right now, facing human extinction because of systems that have completely failed humanity. I'm really excited to start talking about this more, and I hope that you find this video useful. Please keep in mind, I'm absolutely not an expert, and what I'm sharing with you is about my experience, which is just really the tip of the iceberg for what decolonization actually is. There is so much information, there's so much you can learn from so many thinkers, and my personal philosophy is that all humans are a fragment of the universe experiencing itself. And whenever I want to learn about a subject, I know that no one person has all the answers. And I hope that you keep that in mind as you listen to me and know that what I'm sharing is just a tiny part of the picture, and it's your work to continue putting pieces together and take this work even further than where I've taken it. I will be talking about issues that are heavy. The history of the colonial project is upsetting, gruesome, horrendous, and has left such a severe mark on this world and is still actively maintained today. So, with that said, I ask that you take a pause and be present with what is being said, with the ideas that are being shared. Take some deep breaths and feel into your body if you have capacity to really be present with this. If you do, thank you for listening, and I hope that you find some of these ideas useful. I'd be interested to hear if you have any thoughts that are expanded from this content, and if there's any ideas that come up that you'd like to add in the comment section. I would love to hear them and make this a conversation. This video is part of a project that I'm working on that's a series of videos about my life curriculum, the main things that I'm learning and putting together in order to create the life that I want to. And decolonization is so foundational to this vision because decolonization is about undoing the programs that have caused so much harm. I'm in far north Queensland, one of the most northern points of Australia at the moment, and it is the beginning of summer. It is ridiculously hot and there's no air conditioning where I live. So I'm sweating a lot and gonna be fighting the heat throughout this entire video. Bear with me while I glisten and glow. Alright, let's get into some basics about what colonialism is. I'm not going to talk about the entire history of colonization, but talk more about the bones of it and how it exists today. The colonial project is a hierarchical system that was created in order to benefit the people at the top of that hierarchy. It's based on manufactured consent to a certain set of rules and beliefs that govern every single individual's relationship with themselves, other people, nature, and the material world. The way that hierarchy plays out within these relational belief systems is one of separation. The idea that individuals are separate, distinct, and have value systems that separate them from each other. The distribution of power is manufactured based on identity, and the creation of separation through racialization and gender expression and gender identity, disability. There's so many different intersections of ways that the hierarchy was created to separate people from each other and give a sense of value to different identities. And because white people had a monopolization on violence at the time that colonization began to spread across the world, they were able to hoard so much power by inflicting violence on the rest of the world. Colonizers used slavery, genocide, theft, and the weaponization of religion in order to subjugate the rest of the world into this system and make this racialized order to serve their purposes. The propaganda of colonization, the mirror that was used to hide all of the violence behind what was happening, was this idea that white men were divinely ordered by God to make the world a white man's world. And that meant a Christian world where people were forced to abandon their cultures and submit into this very rigid ruling system of white supremacy and Christian hierarchy. The colonial project has such a strong set of rules and systems that are drilled into us through our education system that oftentimes our imaginations are entirely colonized. We have lost the ability to perceive that another world is possible and that the way that things are not the only way that things can be. We believe that that's the only way that we can stay safe. Ultimately, colonial hoarding in the world has created infinite suffering, and it's really based on this hoarding principle that invented the idea of scarcity, the idea that there isn't enough housing, there isn't enough food for everyone, and we have to be against each other in order to be safe ourselves. As you can imagine, capitalism and patriarchy are sister systems with colonialism. They prop each other up together and benefit the same people. These systems have treated the earth itself as a subject to be exploited at the white man's will. And we are very quickly approaching a time in humanity where the unsustainability of this practice has reached a point of crisis. All of this is nothing new. You're probably pretty familiar with all of those ideas by now, and it can be pretty overwhelming to hear about the impacts of colonization on the planet, whether from the environmental side or the human suffering side. Helplessness, shame, and denial are part of the programming as well. I've dealt with a lot of heavy feelings and shame about my whiteness when being exposed to how much darkness exists in the world. Honestly, I'm still working through those sticky feelings. Similar to how I've seen young men completely shrink when hearing things like, men are trash, or I hate all men, whatever type of thing like that, I also have felt myself feel small when hearing people say, ugh, white people, or whatever thing along those lines, because I didn't have the tools to integrate my knowledge of the harm of my ancestors and other white people in this world, and my desire to be seen and to act as an ally. The truth is, there's a huge amount of pain and ugliness in the world that needs to be witnessed and needs to be recognized and identified truthfully and honestly, but it doesn't need to be embodied. It doesn't need to be carried. My decolonial shadow work journey has been one of empowerment, of learning how to show up in right relationship and in integrity without coming from a place of shame and guilt. We're all programmed into complicity in the colonial project. It is so painful to acknowledge that a million things that we interact with every single day has a bloodstained background, from the dollars that we exchange with each other, the pieces of metal that exist in our phone that were mined by children, the plastic that covers so many things that we use every day that eventually will participate in killing part of nature. It's almost impossible to avoid all of these harmful things that have been normalized in our day-to-day life. And it's even more impossible to integrate and understand how much harm we ourselves are complicit in. Sometimes it really feels like all of this constant onslaught of climate disaster is the earth shaking humans off of itself like fleas after we've pillaged and harmed her for so long. We are facing human extinction level crisis if we cannot take ownership of the harm that we have collectively caused to the earth and to each other. A very central aspect of colonization is the very masculinist attachment to one truth, the idea that only one way can be right. From the way that Christianity enforces that it is the one true way to have eternal life, and every other way you'll be eternally suffering in hell. Or the idea that we should just accept that the rest of the world is experiencing lower conditions of living because of their own fault. Never mind the underground and sometimes explicit missions that have toppled and exploited and completely overturned democratic, successful governments all over the world. I'm saying masculinist not as a way to point at men at all. It's more about this idea that colonization has erased the feminine, the sacred feminine balance between masculine and feminine energy. And this also isn't about gender identity. It's not about the way that people express themselves. Sacred feminine energy is not about sex. It's this global ethereal concept of the energy that allows flow, that allows rest, that allows co-creation. And in a world where this has been suppressed, shamed, and erased from our human right, the masculine energy has become toxic. That looks like the unwillingness to be wrong, rigidity, the unwillingness to recognize that the system that was built in the name of masculinity is now boiling all of us underwater. The masculine energy believes itself to be unpenetrable, but the reality is that we have all been penetrated by petrochemicals and microplastics for a long time now. Now, the willingness to be wrong is the only path that can save humanity from extinction, and it takes a really big expansion of capacity in order for people to be willing to be wrong. Being with reality is not easy. In Alamo Stacy's essay Exposed: Environmental Politics and Pleasures in Post-Human Times, she quotes Ulrich Beck saying, "Living within risk society, as Ulrich Beck argues, entails daily reckonings with scientific knowledge. And yet the citizen in risk society," Beck explains, "suffers the double shock of not only hearing the news about, say, toxins in foods, but in the loss of sovereignty over assessing the dangers to which one is subjected." For me, I think we really have to prepare our hearts to recognize not only how wrong we have been, but also how much irreparable damage has been done already. I think there's a very real question here of how can we expand our capacity to face so much grief? How do we sit with grief? How do we see things as they are without being completely swallowed? I've been working with a mentor, Ariel Yoon, weekly for the past few months, and grief has been such a huge topic in our sessions. I really carried grief at the top of my lungs. I feel it like a lid that separates my heart from my head, and it feels like this weight and pressure that if I were to remove it all at once, I would not be able to handle how much grief I have. Our bodies do have systems in place to protect us. We can't just put our bodies through interminable stress and exposure to grief in the name of right relationship or trying to be a martyr for justice. Our bodies have limitations, and when we don't honor those limitations, we lose part of our vitality, and that sometimes shows up as chronic illness, burnout, or exhaustion. A really important thing that I've been learning with Ariel is that grief doesn't have to come out all at once. We can learn to open the lid 1% every single day and witness things as they are, come into more presence, cry about it, feel it, and then close the lid. Just letting that 1% clear out of us every single day. Truth is, most of us are trained to be completely numb and complicit within the system, but as we're exposed to so much harm every single day, inevitably our bodies are carrying this reality, whether we have it in our conscious awareness or not. It's also incredibly important to be resourcing ourselves. There's so many ways that you can do that. For me, I get really resourced from spending time in nature and having quiet time where I can reflect and allow feelings to show up as they are and welcome them. Whatever your practice is, I urge you and invite you to be intentional about letting yourself feel resourced, letting your cup be refilled. The revolution will not be won from people who are unwell. And I don't mean that in an ableist way. I just mean that we have to do everything in our capacity to have the most power that we can to show up. A couple years ago, when I was first exploring the idea of being a healer and feeling called to that, I met with this really incredible Black woman who was a healer, and I had questions for her. I wanted to know what my role was as a white healer, where I had permission to show up, and what my practice could look like if I didn't have my own lineage that I was bringing forward. I felt really confused about this because I didn't want to accidentally do harm by acting out of a programmed way of cultural appropriation or white saviorism. And what she told me was really powerful and simple. It wasn't the answer to all of these questions, but it helped me go on the path. She said, a lot of what white people don't realize is that they carry so much grief from the loss of their own culture. And that really hit me. I sat with that for a while and just thought about how whiteness is something that was traded for as a protection. And we traded our customs, rituals, and connection to land in order to have this hierarchical system. Doctora Rosales Metza's course brought a lot of meaning to this topic. She talked a lot about how every single person has ancestors that at one point were indigenous to some land. They were people of the earth who were in relationship with the land. She really encouraged us to honor and connect with these healed ancestors. We also spent time really feeling into the immense loss of tradition, culture, rituals, and wisdom. And then we were encouraged to do what we could to explore and recover our ancestral practices. This led me into a path of exploring paganism. I'm really just at the beginning of it, but I found it a really interesting thing to look into. Paganism is a word that came about in the 15th century, and it's the word that characterized people, basically country people, who used folk medicine and ancient ways of being and didn't subscribe to the emerging Christian hierarchical system. Pagan practices have widely been lost because a lot of people weren't literate and weren't able to record what those practices were. And also, so much of it was intentionally destroyed via the witch trials and so many other forms of repression that basically erased this part of European culture. We know that their practices really focused on living with the land and following seasonal cycles. And the YouTuber Lauren Moss, in her video Intro to Paganism, talks about how some of the main forms of paganism looked like rituals, communion with nature, honoring moon phases, altars, divination, community and celebration, and ancestral reverence. These are practices that exist in so many different spiritual forms, and it's important to remember that we, white people who have lost our culture, can still tap into these practices in our own way. Not every single thing about paganism resonates with me, to be fair, and I think it's really important for your journey to be one about taking what resonates with you, what works, and what you feel is right to bring into these times. When we acknowledge the grief and resource ourselves a little bit more, we have so much more capacity to be present with what is here right now and to act from a place of clarity. Decolonization is about divesting from the current system, and Doctora Rosales Mesa talks about how talking about colonization as if it's something from the past really takes away the reality that it is something that is maintained, preserved, and in action today. She shares how we're all programmed with this fear of how do I survive while divesting from the system that I've survived in for so long? In fact, white people have the most assets on earth and simultaneously the largest manufactured sense of scarcity. That's why hoarding exists. We have been taught and programmed to believe that it's never enough and that we always need to have more, and that in order to have more, we have to take from others. Unlearning these programs and letting go of this sense of scarcity and this fear is a process of neuro-decolonization. It's literally rewiring your brain in order to have more safety within your body without hoarding, and in order to learn new ways of being, like asking permission and not feeling entitled to things just because you've been told that you are. But it's really not about shame either. Shame is a stuck energy of disconnection. It's an energy that keeps you colluding, isolated from your personal value and stuck in this feeling of powerlessness. Doctora Rosales talks about how there's actually a benefit to shame that's been programmed in us, because instead of divesting, you can keep all of your stuff, but you just have to feel bad about it. When you feel shame, part of your spirit is outside of your body, and it's important to call it back and come into your power and come into responsibility. One of the first things that I learned about neuroplasticity, which is the idea that your brain is moldable and you can constantly rewire it, is from a therapist that I saw about 6 years ago. The tool that she gave me for rewiring your brain helped me so much. And it was annoying as hell. She told me that every single time that I felt myself have a negative thought about myself, to replace that with 15 positive thoughts. And that might sound corny or like way too much work, but it actually started setting a new program in me where I would identify a pattern and change that pattern. You can use that tool for yourself. The conversation on shame really shows where I think society has majorly missed the mark in decolonization. I think that a lot of times cancel culture has taught us that the only thing that we have to offer is feeling bad about something, and the powerlessness in that is really not worth our time. I remember one time I heard this white girl in a community group that I was part of say something along the lines of, "My biggest fear in life is saying something problematic." Mind you, I had heard her say problematic things multiple times, and it kind of made me laugh, but also made me sad to think that she was living with so much fear of saying the wrong thing. We have all been programmed, and we are all in this journey of trying to become better people, and perfection is not an option. It doesn't exist. It's really about our willingness to own our mistakes. When we center perfectionism, then we're putting our fear in front of us, and that becomes a block in our ability to actually connect with people, because instead of relating to them on a human, imperfect level, we're trying to manipulate them into seeing us a specific way. I definitely relate to that feeling of that girl, though. I've found myself so many times embarrassingly fumbling for words when I said something that I knew came out wrong or that showed a bias that I had. And I was so desperate to be seen as an ally that it was so hard for me to recover and know how to move from that point of embarrassment. The imprint of cancel culture puts us in so much fear of misspeaking that we're actually unable to be authentic with each other. And we're just constantly performing in this echo chamber of what is perceived as right in that moment. I've shared a reading below called Protocols for Non-Indigenous People Working with Indigenous Knowledge. I really recommend that you read the whole thing, but they talk about this idea of shame and how shame is not even close to the point. Actually, when we make mistakes, that's a huge learning point, and some of the biggest leaders are the ones who gracefully learn from the mistakes that they make. It's about accountability, taking responsibility, being willing to expand while being in process imperfectly. That's a lot of buzzwords for you. In Tema Okun's essay, also linked below, called White Supremacy, Still Here, she talks about how it's so important to honor people who give us feedback and to not be reactive when we're called out for being in the wrong. because people who are sharing feedback are, in fact, building a bridge for you to show up in relationship in a better way. And gracefully taking feedback and criticism that you might have misspoken or you might have done something out of alignment is an opportunity for you to expand. I also strongly recommend that you read her entire essay. She really breaks down how white supremacy exists in our day-to-day and what the remedies to them are. The question becomes, how can I allow shame to be a call for change? Doctora Rosales also talks about shame and how it's so important to honor these heavy energies as teachers and guides, not to identify with them, but for them to show us where we are out of alignment with humanity. Also, I'm definitely not telling you to become the white savior TM. People who think that their responsibility in life is to save others generally become very resentful and entitled in their martyrdom. You don't have to save others, you have to be a relative. You have to learn trust and right relationship, and definitely have to move at the speed of trust, not your own urgency. I really have been learning that lesson through organizing and finding the tension that lies in trying to make something happen quickly and trying to be in relationship with people in that process. True power is power with instead of power over. It's not about making decisions for other people. Not letting urgency override consent and checking back in again and again to ensure that trust is enshrined in the process the whole time. Doctora Rosales' course was full of so many rich rituals that really allowed us to align our hearts with the work rather than just coming from an intellectual space. Because you can read a million articles, essays, books about decolonization and still not know how to reprogram your heart and your body to be in alignment with this work. Rituals are a way of aligning intention with action. Some rituals that we did were bringing offerings to Mother Earth, speaking to her, singing to her, building a relationship and seeing her as our divine provider. We also brought offerings to our healed ancestors and used tools like salt and fire in order to create boundaries with our unhealed ancestors. We carry the stories of our ancestors, and it's important for us to know which ones we want to carry forward and which ones we're ready to discard and alchemize and throw into the fire. I invite you to be creative and explore what rituals might help you align your heart with decolonization and deprogram the harmful systems that have existed in you. At one point, we all repeated after Doctora, saying, "I do not consent to live in fear. I sense it is a sacred responsibility to exist in the collective. Trusting that I have enough, I release the grips on hoarding." I think that having mantras or sayings that you write somewhere in order to inscribe them on your heart is such a beautiful practice, and maybe there's a way that you might want to do that. That also makes me think of a class by Mariam Hasna in the New Earth Mystery School where she talks about declarations of sovereignty, and she reads almost 5 pages of basically mantras like that, where it's an energetic declaration of cutting contracts with the systems and programs that have been ingrained in us but no longer serve us. I encourage you to write your own declaration of sovereignty. Whatever you're wanting to let go of, that you release that. Speak it out loud in order to bring more of yourself home to your body. I still have so much to learn. This work that I've been on is just the beginning of the journey. I want to learn more history without the colonized framework. I want to learn people's stories that exist when they're not told by the people who destroyed them. I want to build relationships with Indigenous people who have fought so hard to maintain culture and rituals that are so rich still. In commitment to this work, I will have to continue always putting my ego down and releasing the false sense of safety that the Colonial Project has offered me at the detriment of so many others. It's a daily practice, and it's one of integrating more and more ways of releasing the system. It's up to you what that looks like. I'm sure you can find a million ways that you can decrease your impact and your collusion in the colonial system. Collusion is not safety, and I'm committed to continue looking for better ways to keep all of us safe. I think that can look like mutual aid, growing your own food, living off of the grid, and living in inclusion and connection with a wider, more diverse set of the community. It's a time to learn skills that allow us to be resourceful enough to not rely on the state. This is the call of our times. This is what it takes for us to survive as humans. Decolonial work is about ensuring a collective future in right relationship. It's not just about undoing programs. It's about tending to the seeds of the forest outside of the crumbling city. We're going to need somewhere to run to soon enough. This work is urgent. We have to be willing to let go of some of our conveniences. We have to evaluate our daily habits and refuse in every single way that we can to collude. And remember, another world is possible.